loud. Hello, welcome, and I guess it's good evening, good late afternoon, good light in this room. We're delighted you're here. I'm Micheline Markham. I'm the Director of Creative Writing, and we are just so thrilled that Jonathan Lethem is joining us tonight as we kick off our Ray reading series, where we invite literary artist grounds every year. He's our first. We have a poet coming in October, Gregory Pardlow, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner, and in November, Catherine Scanlon's coming, a fiction writer. That is made possible by the Dungannon Foundation, so I'd like to thank them as they continue to support this programming so that we can have wonderful writers like Jonathan come and read to us. Speaking of reading and of listening, that difficult sometimes skill more and more these days, I'm going to ask you to take your telephones and put them away and put them on the airplane mode so that we can all be in the same space together. Yeah, I know you guys know how I am. And I think that's it. I would like to ask Danny Eisenberg to come up. He's going to introduce Jonathan to us. He's a third year in the MFA program, fiction writer. We'll have a reading. There'll be time for questions and answers afterwards, and book signing and poster signing. Yeah, so welcome everyone, and Danny.
Hello, thank you. It's my honor tonight to introduce Jonathan Lethem. Jonathan Lethem has been a fixture of American letters for over 3 decades with, if my count is correct, 18 books of fiction and 4 books of essays, not to mention his many appearances in places like Rolling Stone and The New Yorker, his installment for the 33 1/3 series on Talking Heads' Fear of Music, his Criterion Collection liner notes for the DVD release of The Killers, the 10-issue Omega the Unknown series he wrote for Marvel Comics, and many other works of fiction and nonfiction. I also learned earlier today that he was cited in a Supreme Court decision recently. In 1999, he was awarded the National Book Critics Circle Award for his 5th novel, Motherless Brooklyn, a murder mystery narrated by a private investigator with Tourette's. In 2005, he received a MacArthur Genius Grant, and just this year, a Guggenheim Fellowship. His newest book, A Different Kind of Tension, which collects stories from across his career along with several new pieces, comes out in just a few days on the 23rd. My own introduction to Jonathan Lethem came during my teenage years when my parents gifted me a copy of his short story collection, Men and Cartoons. I was immediately drawn to one story in particular. The dystopianist, thinking of his rival, is interrupted by a knock on the door, which is in the new collection, by the way. The story is as delightful as its title, equal parts Julio Cortázar and Cartoon Network. There's a talking sheep who says things like, "I've had better days, let's put it that way," and "You've got a few things to answer for." Yet between these delirious bursts of humor, the story also captures essential truths of the writing life and perhaps of all experience, the search for deeper meaning, the desire for validation and connection. He had to go deeper, the dystopianist thinks, find something resonant, something to crawl beneath the skin of reality and render it monstrous from within. Elsewhere in his fiction, Lethem does indeed render reality monstrous, or at least misshapen, the old boundaries of genre and narrative giddily blown out like a piñata giving up its candy. In one breath, he might create a richly detailed, faithful rendering of New York or California, and in the next, kids are turning themselves invisible and flying thanks to a magic ring. Yet the characters who populate his fictional worlds, these would-be heroes and dystopianists, all equally at the mercy of life's absurdities, act out familiar tragicomedies. Like all of us, they lurch through life in search of some tenderness. I've come to think of Jonathan Lethem as a quintessential writer's writer, by which I mean that after I read his work, I find I'm always eager to go write, energized by the vigor of his prose and the depth of his imagination. Perhaps you will feel the same way yourself tonight. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our Ray visitor, Jonathan Lethem.
Thank you. What a great introduction. What a nice room. You're right about the light. I'm so happy to be here. Short stories. I'm just having this book appear officially on Tuesday, but it's over there, and that's the first time I've seen a pile of them, except for the very short pile I have in my house, so it's exciting to see it in the real world. This book is 35 years of my writing life. There are stories in here, I think that's the number. There are stories in here that go back to 1989. And little scraps of the first few stories that might have been written even earlier in the 80s, 87, 88. Up to a final piece which I wrote, especially for this book, a long story, not quite a novella, that I wrote last summer. Just finished a year ago. And so this is a kind of accidental autobiographical cross-section for me. When I was rereading all these stories, I was encountering all these different versions of myself. Sometimes that wasn't exactly as I remembered it. Some of the stories I thought were the good ones weren't the good ones, but then there were others that popped up and surprised me, and I thought, oh, I used to be smart. This is one I liked a lot when I got back in touch with it. And it's, I think, maybe a good one to read in a room full of writers, lots of writers, because it's a story about writers, different ages of writers, aspiring ones and what I am now, although I wasn't at the time that I wrote the story, old, gray, what am I? Emeritus writers, walking, well, kind of people of new and selected stories. And the story is called The King of Sentences. And I think I'll read straight through. Maybe I'll interrupt myself and say some things in the middle. But anyway, I'm really looking forward to the Q&A in any case. You have to all come up with really awesome questions for me, okay? The King of Sentences. This was the time when all we could talk about was sentences. Sentences. Nothing else stirred us. Whatever happened in those days, whatever befell our regard, Clea and I couldn't rest until it had been converted into what we told ourselves were astonishingly unprecedented and charming sentences. Esther's cleavage is something to be noticed. Or, you can't have a contemporary prison without contemporary furniture. Or, I envision an art which will make criticism itself seem like a cognitive symptom, one which its sufferers define to themselves as taste, but is in fact nothing of the sort. Or, I said I want my eggs scrambled, not destroyed. At the explosion of such a sequence from our green young lips, we'd rashly scribble it on the wall of our apartment with a filthy wax pencil, or type it 25 times on the same sheet of paper, and then photocopy the paper 25 times, and then slice each page into 25 slices on the paper cutter in the photocopy shop, and then scatter the resultant 625 slips of paper throughout the streets of our city. Fortunes without cookies. We worked in bookstores, the only thing to do. Nobody who didn't work in bookstores, and that included every one of our customers, knew what any of the volumes throbbing along these shelves were worth, not remotely. Nor did the bookstore's owners. Clea and I were custodians of a treasury of sentences, much bigger on the inside than the outside. though we mostly handled the books only by their covers, or paged briefly through to ascertain that no dunce had striped the pages yellow or pink with a highlighter. We communed deeply with them, felt certain that only we deserved to abide with them. Any minute, we'd read them all cover to cover. It was surely about to happen. Meanwhile, every customer robbed our treasure a little. At the cash registers, we spoke sentences tailored to convey our disdain in terms so subtle it was barely detectable. If our customers blinked a little at the insults we embedded in our thank yous, we believed they might just be worthy of the marvels their grubby dollars entitled them to bear away. We disparaged modern and incomplete forms, gormless and garbled jargon, graffiti, advertising, text messaging. No sentences conveyed by photons or bounced off satellites had ever come home intact. Punctuation, we knew it was holy. Every sentence we cherished was sturdy and biblical in its form, carved somehow by hand-dragged implement, or slapped onto sheets by an inky key. For sentences were sculptural. Were we the only ones who knew this? Sentences were bodies, too, as horny as the flesh envelopes we wore around the house all day. While erotically enjambed in our loft bed, Clea patrolled my utterances for subject, verb, predicate, as a chef in a five-star kitchen would minister a recipe, ensuring that a souffle or sourdough would rise. A good, brave sentence. I can hardly bear your heel at my nape without roaring, might jolly Clea to instant climax. We'd arise from the bed giggling, clutching for glasses of cold water that sat in pools of their own sweat on bedside tables. The sentences had liberated our higher orgasms. Nothing to sneeze at. Similarly, we were also sure that sentences of the right quality could end this hideous, endless war, if only certain standards were adopted at the highest levels. They never would be. All the media trumpeted the administration's lousy grammar. Well, that's a line that hasn't worn out. Never knew how lousy it could get. But we were chumps and we knew it. As makers of sentences, we were practically fetal, beneath notice, unwashed, fooling around in our spare time on somebody else's dime. Nobody loved our sentences as we loved them, and so they congealed or grew sour on our tongues. We barely glanced at our wall scribblings for fear of what a few weeks or even hours might expose in our infatuations. Our photocopied fortune slips we'd find in muddy clogs in storm drains, tangled with advertising flyers, unheeded. Our manuscripts? Those were unspeakable secrets, kept not only from the world but from each other. My pages were shameful, occluded everywhere with X's of regret. Okay, so that is a slightly antique reference. On a typewriter, when you didn't like what you'd written, you'd wind it back and you'd do an X over the words. You're learning something. My pages were shameful, occluded everywhere with X's of regret. I scurried to read Clea's manuscript every time she left the apartment, but never confessed that I even knew it existed. Her title was, "Those Young Rangers Thought Love Was a Scandal Like a Bald White Head." Mine was, "I heard the laughter of the sidemen from behind their instruments." Others might hail kings of beer or kings of burgers. We bowed only to the king of sentences. There was just one. We owned his titles in immaculate first editions and tattered reading copies and odd variant editions. It thrilled us to see the pedestrian jacket copy and salacious cover art on his early mass-market paperbacks, to think he'd once been considered fodder for dime store carousels. The newest editions of the titles he'd allowed to be reprinted, because 4 early novels had been suppressed for republication. These were splendidly austere. Their jackets, from the small presses that published him now, bearing text only, no graven images. The progress of his editions on our shelf was like a cartoon of evolution. A slug crawling from the surf to become a mammal, a monkey, and then at last, a noble, hairless fellow gazing into the future. The King of Sentences gave no interviews, taught nowhere, condescended to appear at no panels or symposia. His tastes, hobbies, and heartbreaks were unknown, and we extrapolated them from his books at our peril. His digital footprint was pale. People like that didn't care about people like him. Google, for what it was worth, favored a famous painter of wildlife scenes, beaver dams, heron hideaways, who had the same name. The King of Sentences only wrote, beavering away himself on a dam of quintessence, while wholly oblivious of public indifference and of a sales record by now likely descending to rungs occupied by poets. His author photograph, identical on 20 years of jackets and press clippings until it stopped circulating at all, arrested him somewhere in the mid-1960s, turtlenecked, holding a cocktail glass forever. His last cocktail, maybe. In the same loft where we entangled, Clea and I drove ourselves mad reading the King of Sentences books aloud, by candlelight, when we ought to have been sleeping. We'd tear the book from each other's hands for the pleasure of running his words like gerbils in the habit trails of our mouths. We'd alternate chapters, pages, paragraphs, finally sentences. At last, we'd agree to read him in unison. He could practically hear us as we intoned his words. We'd swear they reached his ears, but not really. Really, we were vowing to ourselves and to each other that we'd make a day trip in search of the King of Sentences, that we'd flush him out, propel ourselves into his company and confidence, buoy him up with our love, and bind ourselves and our secret manuscripts, oh yeah, to his greatness. We each had what the other needed. Of this we were positive. Maybe we'd watch him write. Maybe he'd watch us dance or fuck. Who knew? We'd buy him lunch. He was surely mortal enough for lunch. He'd want us, at least, for lunch. He lived, we learned, north of the city, having drawn from his days as a Greenwich Village flaneur whatever inspiration he needed, and departed around the time of that last photograph and cocktail. Minimal detective work pinned him to a P.O. box in Hastings-on-Hudson. How clever and coy he had been to find a place name that was itself, with the mere insertion of an apostrophe, a sentence, and a faintly lascivious one, too. Hastings-on-Hudson. So it was that we knew he'd summoned us to his hiding place. Clea could play Hudson, I'd be Hastings. We sent a postcard warning, addressed to his P.O. box. No return address, so he couldn't refuse. No fancy sentences, fearing his judgment. Just fragments, coming in 2 weeks. Get ready. Can't wait to meet in person. As if we'd already met on other planes of existence, for we had. The appointed day came upon us like a sickness, and though each in our privacy, Clea and I, might have preferred to stay in bed and sweat it out, we couldn't have looked each other in the eye if we hadn't staggered out of doors, to the subway, up to Grand Central Terminal. During the short train ride, we held hands, fever sweaty at the palms. Exiting Metro North's Hastings-on-Hudson station under a thundercloud-clouded sky, we found ourselves the sole travelers not to be claimed by family members waiting in Subarus or beeping their driver's side doors unlocked as they crossed the parking lot with cell phones clammed to their ears. The train continued on behind us, and the station depopulated as if neutron bombed. This is the town of the King of Sentences. This little town. He could be watching us now, don't act stupid, with a telescope. We blundered along something called Main Street, seeking the post office until a passerby directed us to Warburton Avenue. Inside the mediocre lobby of the post office, we staked out a position near the numbered boxes, innocuously pretending to screw up our change of address forms so that we had to start over a dozen times. His box, which we surveilled with peripheral vision only, pulsed with risk and possibility. Our own postcard had been handled there, a precursor to this encounter. Losing patience, we sidled to the main counter. What time on the average day does the box holder typically, pick up? Box mail goes up at 10:30. Right, sure, but mostly when do citizens appear and begin to gather up the mail, take it to their private homes? Whenever they care to. Sure, right, this is America, isn't it? Sure is. Thank you. We resumed charades with a chained pen. 2, 3, 5, 8 Hastings-on-Hudsonians lumbered in to check their P.O. boxes, sort circulars into recycling bins, greet the postmistress, trade coins for stamps, each of comically tiny denominations. Everyone in this hamlet, it seemed, had just found a 16 or 23-cent stamp in a dusty drawer and had chosen today to supplement it up to viability using car seat nickels and pennies. Yet somehow, between transactions, the postmistress had snuck away for a tattling phone call. Or so we surmised from the blinking patrol car that now swept up to the front of the PO. Into the lobby strode a cowboy-esque figure, a man, late 50-ish, wearing a badge in the manner of a star, lean, and, when he spoke, laconic. Clea read my mind and said to him, "Are you the sheriff in these parts?" "Chief of police," he said. "Not the sheriff of Hastings-on-Hudson?" "No, ma'am, there isn't one. Can I ask what you're doing here?" "Waiting." "Have you folks got postal business today?" "No," I said. "But we've got business with someone who might have postal business, if that's okay." "I suppose it might be, sir, but I'm forced to wonder who we're talking about." "The King of Sentences." "I see," said the chief of police. "You two wouldn't happen to be the authors of a certain unsigned and borderline ominous postcard?" "Might happen to be, though there was hardly ominous intent." "I see," said the chief of police. "And now you're waiting, I guess, for the addressee?" "In the manner of free Americans in a federally controlled public space, yes. We checked with the postmistress." "I see," said the chief of police. "You mind if I wait a bit myself?" "By definition, we can't." Soon enough, he appeared. The King of Sentences, unmistakably, the withered, like a shrunken apple fetish of the noble cipher in the photograph. He wore a gray sweatshirt and caramel corduroys with the knees and thighs bald, like a worn radial tire. Absurd black Nikes over gray dress socks. Hair white and scant. Eyes tiny and darting. Those eyes darted to the not sheriff, who nodded minimally. The king nodded back with equal economy. We collapsed as planned, to our knees, conveying the beautiful anguish of our subjection to the sole king of sentences. Bowed our heads, fingers wriggling as if combing the air for particles of his greatness. Immediately, a chapter of I heard the laughter of the sidemen from behind their instruments, secreted in the waistband of my underwear, buckled as I knelt there. The king stood inert, if anything, sagged slightly. The chief turned and shook his head, a little appalled. "You okay?" he asked the king. "Sure," said the king of sentences. "Let me talk to them for a minute." "Anything you say," said the chief of police. The lawman went outside to stand and take a cigarette beside his cruiser. He watched us through the window. We nodded and waved as we scrambled back to our feet. "Who sent you?" the king said. You, Clea said. "It was you." "We weren't so much sent as drawn," I said. "You gave us the gift of your work, and now we're here. A gift in return." "Take us," Clea said. "No, thank you," the king said. His eyes shifted nervously from Clea, settling on me. "We anointed you the king of sentences," I told him. "We're the ones who did that, nobody else." I didn't want to bully him with news of how scarcely his name circulated these days, how stale and marked down were his hardcovers on used bookstore shelves. "I didn't tell you to come," he said. "No," I said, "but you are responsible for our presence." "Let me be clear," he said. "I have nothing for you. Take us home." "Not on your life. We came all this way." He shrugged. "When's the next train back?" The sentences that emerged from his mouth were flayed, generic, like lines from black and white movies. I tried not to be disappointed in this stylistic turn. He has something to teach us, always. "We don't care about the next train," I said. "We don't have tickets. We came for you." "I don't fraternize," he said. "This kind of intrusion is the last thing I need." "Lunch," I begged. "Just lunch." "I eat only what my housekeeper prepares." A disproportion of sodium could murder me at this point. Clea hugged herself with pleasure. I heard her murmur the line over again, cherishing it privately. Disproportion, sodium, murder me. The king craned on his Nike toes, checking that the cop was still outside. "Forget lunch," I said. "Just an hour of your time." "We're to hover here in the post office lobby for an hour?" he asked. "Doing what exactly?" "No, let's go somewhere," Clea said. A hotel room, if you won't have us in your house." "Or the bar," I said, offering a check on Clea's presumption. "The bar in the lobby of a hotel, a public setting for a cocktail." The king laughed for the first time, a cackle edged like a burned cookie with bitterness. "What largesse," he said. "You take me to one of our town's fine hotels? They're as superb as the restaurants. Motel 6 or Econo Lodge. I believe those are your two options." "Anywhere," Clea panted. The king's weary gaze again shunted. Clea, myself, the disinterested postmistress, the chief outside, who now ground a butt into the curb with his heel and turned his head to follow the progress of some retreating buttocks. The king's voice edged down an octave. "Econo Lodge," he said, "on Lower Brunion Avenue. I'll find you there in 15 minutes. "We don't have a vehicle," I said. "Too bad," he said. "Can we ride with you?" "No way, Jose." "How do we get there?" "Figure it out." The king of sentences departed the PO, skulked around the corner and out of view, presumably to his car. I couldn't have entirely imagined the little extra kick in his step as he went. The king had been energized, if only slightly, by meeting his subjects. It was a start, I thought. On the sidewalk, we teetered with excitement, blinking in the glare that now filtered through the gnarled clouds. The chief looked at us up and down again. We offered charming smiles. "So, can I give you folks a lift back to the station?" "No thanks," I said. "We're looking for Lower Brunion Avenue. Care to point us in the right direction?" "Why Lower Brunion?" asked the chief of police. "The Econo Lodge, if you must know. Is it walking distance?" "Longish, I'd say. Why not let me escort you?" "Sure." We sat in a cage. The back seat of the policeman's car smelled of smoke, perfume, and vomit, raising interesting questions about the definition of police work in Hastings-on-Hudson. The chief took corners smoothly in the prowling, snaky manner of a driver unconcerned about regulating his speed. "So," he said, "you two in the regular habit of doing junk like this?" "What do you mean by junk?" "Putting yourselves in the hands of a customer like your friend in there?" "I'd be junk in his hands any day," Clea said defiantly. "Well, he's old and likely pretty harmless by now," the chief said. "I saw him the other day in the pharmacy getting himself one of those inflatable donuts for sitting on when you've got anal discomfort. I'd say from what I've heard, those sorts of troubles are his just desserts. We're not dummies around here, you know. When he moved up here from the city, a certain number of stories trailed after him. He's been a bad boy." "He's the greatest maker of sentences in the United States of America," I said. "I've had a look," the chief said. "He's not bad. I'm just wondering if you ever troubled with the content of his books as opposed to just the sentences?" "Sentences are content," Clea said. The chief lifted his hands in mock surrender. "Fair enough, then. I've said my piece. Just understand this. Whatever my personal views of either his character or his prose, he's under my protection surely as any other citizen in this town. Comprende?" "Does everyone here speak Spanish?" said Clea. "Is this a bilingual metropolis?" "That's enough out of you, young lady. Here's the Econo Lodge, and a good day to you both." "Thanks, Chief." We crept inside the Econo Lodge's slumbering atrium. A uniformed teenage clerk blinked hello, raised his hand. We ignored him. The king of sentences hovered beside a counter bearing urns of complimentary coffee labeled premium, diesel, and jet fuel. The king nodded mutely, beckoned to us with a tilt of his chin. We trailed him down a corridor with a tongue-hued carpet. I tried not to visualize an anal donut. "Inside," he said. The king lit only a lamp at the bedside in the windowless room. We crowded in, the room a mere margin to the queen-size bed. The air conditioner rumbled and hummed. The temperature was frigid. The king took the only chair, gestured us to the bed's edge. We sat. Clea and I began simultaneously tangling aloud. Clea said, "You're the..." "Let's not waste time," the king interrupted. He spoke in an exhausted snarl. All redemptive possibility purged from his voice and manner. Our rendezvous had taken on the starkness of an endgame. "Do you want money?" he asked. "Money?" I said. "That's right." He reached into his shirt pocket and revealed a packet of 20s, obviously prepared in advance. It occurred to me wildly that he'd taken us for blackmailers. Perhaps he was blackmailed routinely, had cash on hand for regular payouts. "How much will it take to make you go away?" he asked. He began counting out piles, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 20, 40, 60, 80, 200. "We don't want your money," I nearly shouted. "You've given us enough. You've given us everything. We're here to give something back." "I suppose I meant to be glad to hear it," he said. He repocketed his money carelessly. We'd like you to be glad, yes. Okay, so I'm going to stop for a second. We're pretty close to the end of the story. I wonder what you hope will happen. On Monday night, I was at, this is going to sound really fabulous. It is kind of fabulous. I was at the Hollywood Bowl with my 15-year-old son watching Neil Young play music. And my 15-year-old reveres Neil Young, which makes me really happy. And I mean, our seats were way, way up at the top, so Neil Young was very small, but it was a good communal experience. And, Neil Young was playing these absolutely gorgeous, heart-rending songs, and his voice was pretty good. He sang, "Only Love Will Break Your Heart," and "Cowgirl in the Sand." And then, in between, he'd back away from the mic for a second, and they'd put another guitar on him. He was like an object that they were placing guitars on and taking them off. He just stood there. And then he would go to the mic and go, "How you doing out there? Thank you folks for coming." And he must have said those same phrases like 8 or 9 times between the songs. He only had those 2 phrases. "How you doing out there?" And "Thank you folks for coming." And at one point, my son, who was, as moved as I was and totally immersed in the music, said, he's so tender when he sings, and he's such an old crab when he talks. It's like this story, like that gap. But also, I thought, oh, that's different from a reading. You get to stop in the middle and be like, "How you doing out there?" And at one point, the only other thing that really happened was somebody yelled in this giant space, in that weird way that one voice can carry, yelled, "Happy birthday, Neil!" And he goes, "It's not my birthday." So anyway, maybe I want to stop in the middle and say, "How you doing out there?" Okay. We don't want your money. You've given us enough. You've given us everything. We're here to give something back. I suppose I'm meant to be glad to hear it. We'd like you to be glad, yes. He only cocked an eyebrow. "What have you got for me?" I untucked my polo shirt and withdrew my chapter. The pages amassed, curled, and baked in its secret compression against my belly. "I knew you looked funny," Clea said. I ignored her, handed the pages across to the king. He accepted them, his expression sour. "For a moment there, I thought you were about to undress," he said. "Would you like that?" Clea said. "Should we undress?" The king examined us starkly. He placed my chapter ignominiously on the carpet beneath his chair. Perhaps now we were at the crossroads. Perhaps we had his attention at last. "Yes," he said cautiously. "I think that could be advantageous." We stripped, racing each other to be the first bared to his view. I'd lose this race in either case, for Clea had rigged the game. She'd written a sentence on her stomach in blue marker. The sentence was, "The sorcerer lately couldn't recall whether he was a capable sleeper or an insomniac." Brilliant, I thought bitterly. The king stared. I saw Clea's pubic hair through the eyes of the king. Clea's bush was full and crazy. I thought, I will never see it again without seeing the pubic hair at which the king of sentences once glanced. The king said, "Insomniac, I believe." Clea blushed around her sentence, her flesh blazing like neon. "Hand me your clothes, please," said the king. We handed the king our clothes. He began immediately rending them in a weary frenzy of destruction, tearing both of our shirts sleeve from sleeve, shredding Clea's bra and underwear, slicing at her skirt with his nicotine teeth. He struggled to do any damage to my jeans. I felt I wanted to help him somehow, but stood jellied in my nakedness, doing nothing, not wishing to insult him, to draw attention to his feebleness. It was a mighty enough display, given his age. The hands that had forged the supreme sentences in contemporary American writing were now dismembering the syntax of my underwear. Soon enough, our daily costumes lay in an unseemly, ruined pile at our feet. My chapter scattered beneath the clothes and chair legs, forgotten. He hadn't looked at even one sentence. Never would. I knew I would have to forgive him. So I did it right there and then. I forgave him. The king moved to the door. We stood on our bare feet, wobbling slightly, goose-pimpled, still breathing out clouds of expectation like frost breath. "That's all?" Clea said. "That's all you asked?" said the king of sentences. "Yes, that's all. That's more than enough." "You're leaving us here?" "I am." He closed the door carefully, not slamming it. Clea and I waited an appropriate interval, then turned and clung to each other in a kind of rapture. Understanding, abruptly and at last, just what it takes to be king. How much, in the end, it actually costs. That's it. Thanks so much. Okay, so there's a mic for the questions. And I imagine there must be some questions after all that. There's one. Thank you for going first.
Hi, oh gosh, okay. You've clearly read a lot as someone who struggles to write on like a timely manner, in a timely manner and actually get stuff done. What recommendations do you have for like staying on top of that and being prolific?
Yeah, well, so, okay, mostly the tortoise wins the race, right? We know this. So, I always feel embarrassed by the P word, prolific, because I know what fast writers are like. I mean, I don't know. I understand from a distance, like that Stephen King is a real single human being and Joyce Carol Oates is a real single human being, and they're doing something that is unimaginable to me. I have no idea what goes on there. I'm not fast like that. I'm really the tortoise. It's really a matter of stacking up, regular effort. Sometimes you would be shocked both at how few sentences or paragraphs land in a given day, and sometimes you'd also be shocked, and I'm totally embarrassed, at how briefly in a given day I'm at the job for real. But the dailiness is everything for me. It's the everyday. That for me is the winning rule. It means I don't count words and I don't count sentences and I don't beat myself up a lot. I just go back to it every single day. And then I'll add one more thing, which is an annoying thing because it's like a Protestant work ethic thing, and it's like a thing your parents say, but the mornings are the best time. I mean, it doesn't have to be 7 a.m., or it could be 11 a.m., whenever you wake up. But putting it first in your day is also, especially in this universe of, this galaxy of distraction. And, before the onset of the social world and the news world and I hope, your pleasure world, the things you're anticipating doing for rewards, just the writing first. Every day and first is usually the ticket. But the other thing that I hear in your question is struggle. And I think I'm blessed, and I don't want to suggest that there's any easy way out of the idea of being blocked for anyone. I think I've been fortunate, but I learned by watching my father paint that a lot of what happens in the studio and this was like really physical thing for me, was being a kid, watching a person with a painting on the wall, working on it. A lot of painting was pretty far from the painting. The brushes were sitting somewhere or in his hand, and he was just looking at it. And I think I took a board that stopping is not being blocked. I was joking earlier that, people have this fantasy of flow. It's very nice to idealize the flow state. And I think for writers, that can involve a fantasy of writing feeling like what it's like to be a swimmer or a runner, to be always doing another thing. Or being like a basketball player. Now you're on offense, now you're on defense, and you get in great shape because you're always running for the whole 2 hours. I don't think that's what it's like for me. I think I'm more like a golfer or a baseball player. There's a lot of time in my cart. And often if I do something, I stare, I just admire it, or I wonder if it was good enough. It's much more stoppages. And just accepting that and not mistaking them for being blocked. That seems really an important thought to me, and maybe it'll help. Okay. Thank you.
So how do you determine when the work is done, per se? Because I've been through the process of editing a book of mine for the past 2.5 years, and I want to get it published eventually, but I'm not sure if it's good enough. I've sent it to beta readers, and I think your stories are really good. So I just want to know, when do you decide, okay, this is when I'm done with the story?
Thank you. Yeah, you've probably heard this thing that artwork is never finished, it's only abandoned, right? So it can be an encouragement to accept that things are imperfect, but also it's not a great guide in itself to when to stop, when to abandon it. But I always think that it's when I'm feeling the pressure of the next thing I want to do more strongly than I'm feeling the desire to continue to perfect or nail down the thing on my desk. It's when I really find myself walking around between writing moments, becoming more and more, inspired or agitated or just dreaming of a next thing. And I realize, that's probably a signal that I creatively stopped being centered in this current project. And I could keep moving commas around, or I could, write this next thing that I really want to make. So I listen for that feeling. And then because I get obsessed with trying to make things perfect, but they can't be. And anyway, also, if you're fortunate enough to get into an editorial process, you will have also not just beta readers, but you'll have people whose job it is to help you catch mistakes and just see things that you probably can't see anymore, because your own sentences turn to mud when you read them too many times. So, but yeah, listen especially for the whisper of the next project. Thank you.
Hi, so correct me if I'm misinterpreting what you said earlier somehow, but I feel like you did mention something about feeling that your old work is just as good as or better than what you're making now. How do you deal with that?
Thank you. That was alert listening, and I really like the question. I've been doing this for a weirdly long time. It's a privilege to just be on the earth this long. And I started trying to make stories and novels when I was 15. I was not consistently. I was not working every day back then at all. But I in weird blurts and, moments of sudden fascination, I I wrote 2 kind of things that were kind of novels, neither of which were publishable, before I was 22. And then I began work on one that later became my first published novel. And I was writing a lot of stories. So I've been just watching myself be bad for so long and then get slightly better. I mean, the amazing thing about your apprenticeship, which is very hard to appreciate while you're in it, is that you're like a creature in a monster movie or a superhero movie. You're like changing rapidly. You can just really watch yourself acquire tools and capacities so quickly, and it's just it's almost chaotic, because the beginning of a story isn't as, like you're a better writer by the end of a 15-page story than you were at the beginning of it. Like the tool acquisition comes in such rapid, it's like watching, sped up nature photography of plants growing here. I'm mixing up my metaphors, but the monsters and the plants and, a Venus flytrap catching things. But this slows down. You can't keep acquiring tools at that rate. And that settles you down a lot. And of course, it's also probably a measure of having put together some idea of, okay, this is what my work is like. This is how to make it fulfill itself. This is, you stop imitating so many different other things or experimenting quite so much, and you start centering a little bit in what you are most pleased by in your drafts and what you seem to be able to do best. And, you will still grow. And I think I was changing a lot still as a writer, even well into my 30s. Some of that is also reading new things, reading things I hadn't read before, because a lot of the toolkit comes from what you absorb from reading books and stories, novels. And but I'm a 61-year-old writer now, and I definitely have lost versions of cleverness or animation or attention, maybe replaced sometimes with some kind of sublime other tones or practices or moods in my work. Maybe God help me, a little wisdom in my work that wasn't there when I was 30 or 35. But reading through all of my stories to put together this collection, I was like, I don't know that I peaked, but I was like, oh, that was a good year. Those couple of stories back to back, that's neat that I was like that. It just looks different to me and strange to me. And this is, something I would wish on anyone. I don't feel badly having that feeling. It's really a privilege to live long enough to find your own work fascinating, and in some cases like the work of someone who impresses you, that you just know you're not really exactly, the same muscle isn't there in the same way, or the same kind of kinetic energy. And actually that story is a good example. I was reading a lot of Stephen Dixon at that time, I can tell. So some of that is like I got high off the fumes of Stephen Dixon's stories, and I was like, I can do that. I don't know if that would strike anyone else, but I'm very aware. So there's a discovery moment. You can't discover things twice. Now I incorporated some of his energy, but it also got sublimated, smoothed into my style. But that piece comes out of this moment of like, holy shit, you get to do it that way? And I can't have that epiphany twice. So, thanks.
I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Oh, I hope at least a couple, yeah.
Have you ever had an experience like one of your characters had in your story, maybe not undressing, but one in which you...
I have undressed. That's happened to me, but not in a very interesting way.
Met an author that you idolize and kind of materialize before
Yeah.
your story.
There's all kinds of things folded into that image for me. I'm making fun of my own reverence, obviously. What's interesting is now, helplessly, if I have to pick a point of identification in that story, it would seem like I'm more like the king than like the kids. But I think when I wrote it, I was sort of equidistant. I was sort of exactly between. And I did work in bookstores, and I was, I happened to be hypnotized by the writing of several people who were legendary for their refusal to appear in my teens and 20s. And some, I mean, those are writers I still am very interested in, but it seemed very important to me in some way that they'd made that choice. It seemed superb. Now I just think it's one way to exist. It turns out I'm like the super opposite. I'm like really garrulous and grateful and chatty, and I do a lot of all those things that the list of things that the King of Sentences refuses to do, like teach and grant interviews and appear on symposia. I'm probably really obnoxious that way. But I was aware of this compulsion and its almost automatic cancellation in respect to certain people who I idolized, where it was like, they really are in my head and they really don't want me in their head. And that's a confusing relationship. I mean, we have this new word for it, parasocial. This was not a word that was available to me when I was writing the story. It's a newer idea. And, to identify with, say, Thomas Pynchon or Don DeLillo, or someone I had in mind in the story who you might not have heard of, but Thomas Berger, who ironically I did kind of impose myself on in a very unusual way. We became super pen pals. And he first, the beginning was like him being polite, and then I started to publish and I would send him my stories, and he started to treat me as a colleague, which was a crazy thing. It was like I'd written myself into this reclusive writer's reality, and he accepted that I was writing myself in. But it was all by writing. We never were in the same physical space. Anyway, I didn't know then how non-reclusive I was going to turn out to be. Although if I'd been smart, I could have guessed, because I'm a sociable person. But to identify with someone who you kind of know they want no part of you is an amusing situation, and especially when you start to feel that maybe you are, this. If you didn't recognize Thomas Berger's name, that's because I was reading him at a time, and this continues to be the case, where fewer and fewer people read him. He's not Pynchon and DeLillo. And so I was like, I'm keeping you alive. And sometimes actively by like thrusting the book upon people in bookstores. And I still do it even now. I'm not a bookseller. I'll buy extra copies of Thomas Berger's books and give them away. So I was like, maybe I deserve to get a little love back, So anyway, just the problems in this whole system of desire seemed really interesting to me, and the story kind of blew out of that. But I think I'm kind of exactly a split personality between the two kids in the story and the king. Even though I look like the king now.
When you were in college, you were in a writing workshop, and you're speaking to a lot of people who are also in writing workshops. And I was wondering if you have any pieces of advice or things that you wish you knew when you were a little bit younger that made you.
Well, first of all, I want to be biographically accurate. I was a total coward, and when I was at college, I happened to be at college at a school that had very interesting, both writing instructors in prose fiction and a really unusually rich bunch of students, many of whom would go on to publish. I hid. I worked around the margins of that scene because I did not want to expose my pages to the situation. I took a measure of it and I was like, I'm not ready for that. So I took a poetry workshop instead, as a way to be kind of like a there, not there person. I hung out with all the fiction writers and I talked with them about what was going on in their workshop. I gossiped with them. But I did not ever take a fiction workshop in college as an undergraduate. I was later in a lot of workshopping situations as a peer in groups that were really important and huge opportunities for me. And then, of course, I go on to lead a lot of workshops. I'll tell you my one hack, or my one, there's nothing is for everyone. And you cannot make your work by democracy. And, nothing is for everyone is as simple as going to Amazon and seeing that there's like a lot of one-star reviews for Ulysses by James Joyce, right? But also realizing that every workshop is this kind of crazy cross-section of different sensibilities, desires, positions, experiences as readers. The ones who are going to speak best to your work are the ones who are fundamentally pretty much already on the same page with you. And that doesn't mean you have to be dismissive of anyone, but in opting to respond and listen and really engage with someone in a workshop who's reading your work, let's just say there's I'll make a cartoon of two different people. You wrote a story about vampire, lesbian zebras. And there's one person who, their first reaction is they're sort of sitting back in their chair, and they're like, well, they're smoking an imaginary cigarette in this cartoon. I would never read a story about lesbian vampire zebras. I run into one or two people who I guess kind of like that sort of thing, and I guess it's a thing, but it's not my kind of thing. But your story, and they start detailing all the things that are, that they advise. And like, if one is going to write the kind of thing you're going to write, you've got to fix all this stuff. There's someone else who's like, oh my God, lesbian vampire, what did I say, zebras. That's what I'm into. I can't believe you're in the same workshop with me. Holy crap, I loved your piece. It was totally amazing, and I love this character, I love this character. Wait, on page 5, why do we get this whole thing over here? Because that was really distracting. It threw me totally out of. That's the person to listen to, right? They're basically a board. They're your kind of reader for your kind of effort in this case. And it's just, if you just think, okay, there are going to be some people who are the one-star reviewer for my Ulysses, and that's fine. We all get to coexist. Together we all make up the literary universe. But you are in the special gang that really, really knows how great it can be when zebras are not only lesbians but vampires. And someone else who gets it is going to be your best counselor. When they are bored, when they hit page 5 and they're like, that character's not, Uncle Fred is not, he doesn't belong in this story. Get rid of Uncle Fred. Get rid of Uncle Fred. Because they know they're like basically with you. That's my advice about workshops.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much,
Thanks.
Jonathan. We think we're coming, can we give them the number? So, books for sale over there. There are also posters that Andy Eaton has made, and I think Jonathan will sign also. Thank you so much,
Great.
everyone, for coming tonight.
Thank you all.
For the
Yeah.
wonderful reading, and we'll see you in October for a very good part of it.